So Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you. Just before hello everyone. Good afternoon to you. Just before we delve into the policy research that we've done, I would like to give all of you a brief introduction about Hype Sri Lanka and what we are here to do. So Hype Sri Lanka started as a youth empowerment incubator by Chiranti, our president, who sits of it is to get young people involved in youth-led processes for systemic development and to get them involved in service level change and systemic change. And for 2 years now, we've been working in various areas in development, working with development organizations on different projects, as well as we've had the policy think tank from the inception, which has worked towards different areas and different topics to look at policy change and the need for it to make sure that we look at different dimensions of systemic development. So that brings us to the work that we have done recently. So today, one key area, and it's a personal passion of mine, to see change in terms of education in Sri Lanka, because I think this is a very crucial point that will really change and help Sri Lankans as a whole adapt and change the modern needs of the contemporary world, as well as also uplift ourselves from poverty, which is an issue that we are seeing in Sri Lanka and which is a growing issue as well. So Hype Sri Lanka, last year during COVID, there was a open call by the government of, or the Ministry of Education through a portal called Iganuma, inviting civil society organizations and the public to submit proposals for public proposals on education reform. So that would be one report, and we will be drawing from the proposals that are represented in that report here today and speaking to them. So we picked a few that we feel are very salient and are pertinent. The second one, which we did this year, is when there was protests and a call by the young people, civic demands for a systemic change. We actually lobbied and we spoke to some of them and collected their viewpoints to create a proposal to represent their views as well. So both of these documents really delved into education, and even in that document, we saw that education and the need for holistic education is really important. So here to present to us today, we have Tharangi Muthukumarana, who is attorney at law and specializes in issues such as criminal law as well as family law, and is an independent policy thinker of the Hype Policy Tank. And we have Atif Anfuddin with us here today, who is a very young but energetic and very enthusiastic member of our team, who is also an independent policy thinker and has been selected to Durham University in the UK to do his law degree. So we're very proud of him, and we know that he'll go far, and he will also be presenting along with myself, who works with Hype and was the former leader of the policy tank, as well as my full-time job is I work with Teach for Sri Lanka, which is also focused on education and to really drive change. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to Tharangi here with us today to take us through her points on education reform.
Thank you, Jeremy, and good evening to everybody. As everybody knows, education is a prime factor in developing human capital. It is essential for the development of a country, both economically and socially. As everybody also probably knows already, the global community has committed to the Education 2030 agenda, which is about better quality education It's about ensuring quality learning and the skills that are necessary for students to go out into the world and just do their best. So like Jeremy explained, we have already published two publications from Hype Sri Lanka. And I will be speaking on the area of curriculum and assessment. Atif will then be speaking about education delivery. Jeremy will be speaking about teach development from the proposals that Hype Sri Lanka has come up with in the last year or two. So it is evident that in the last few years, Sri Lanka has been through many crises, maybe the pandemic, the financial crisis, and therefore there has been a significant education loss to students both in the urban and rural areas in all grades. And that has made it very difficult maybe for them to figure out and finish their curriculum, their syllabus. It has made it difficult for them to sit exams. We've seen even pictures where examinations haven't been conducted in the most best possible ways. And I think all these issues have led to a lot of mental stress and trauma for students across the borders. So we at Hype Sri Lanka believe that the Ministry of Education must take a few steps. And some of these steps are to do with the change or the reform of the school curriculum and assessments. Firstly, we like to prioritize multilingualism, which means that the education system must cater to students who will be conversant in both English and the state languages equally. This is in order to maintain peace, reconciliation, as well as to promote effective communication. And we don't believe that they should be taught in the exam-oriented approach that I was taught when I was in school. It should be very practical. We should be able to both read, write, and speak all three languages very well. Secondly, the ministry must improve comprehensive, age-appropriate sexual reproductive health rights. This is something that I am very passionate about, which has to be included in both the science and health syllabus. I'm sure we can all recall how we were taught this curriculum when we were in school. My teacher just kind of skipped right through it. It might have happened in other schools as well. And I believe that this needs to change because it's very important that we are taught very important things like maybe menstrual health, about pregnancies, about contraception, about STDs, consent, because this would enable both students, children, and even adults today to make better informed decisions. It'll help them to prevent sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, and to make better decisions for their mental health being, as well as have better interpersonal relationships. So next, I also like to look at the numerous events that we have undergone in Sri Lanka, which have highlighted the importance of consolidating peace and harmony in Sri Lanka and preventing violence. Now, this, I believe, the main reason that we have had to go through many violent situations, many riots between our religions and races is because of the lack of intercultural understanding. To this end, I believe that peace education is vital, and we can include these areas in citizenship education, in our religious syllabus, as well as in history, which would promote knowledge on how to prevent the occurrence of conflicts or even resolve conflicts peacefully. In a democratic country like ours, I believe that it is important to know the laws. It's important to know the rule of law and the laws that we are governed by, the procedures, and very basic rights that we all have. And to do this, I believe that we need to include that area in the curriculum to reform citizenship education to also include legal factors. Electives on entrepreneurship, family and consumer science, foreign languages, writing, visual arts, and vocational education should also be introduced, as I believe that these electives will make the students help them to investigate their interests, better their skills, and bring a level of clarity to their career goals. Finally, the ministry must adopt advanced planning inclusive of crisis management strategies. That means instead of having one large exam at the end of the year, we would have this in periodic assessments. We would have testing, digital examinations, and systems that do not require you to kind of study the whole year or cram during the last few weeks just to sit an exam where you would kind of pour out everything that you memorized. Which brings me to my last topic, which is that assessment structures must be modified. We must have a greater focus on critical thinking and analytical thinking. And to do this, we can do that through formative assignments, we can do it through research papers, we can even have classroom debates, presentations, etc. Because I believe that the objective of education is to create a generation of citizens that are ready to take on the world and who can realize their goals and succeed in the future. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, to move on to the next piece, one thing that we really would like to talk about is teacher development. So the first proposal that we've extracted from the youth public policy proposals is the need to inculcate teacher capability in child psychology to equip teachers to identify and respond to children who have learning disabilities, emotional and psychological challenges, and the need for teacher development that adapts to the needs of the students that they teach and include children from different backgrounds is a key factor that can help negatively affected children recover from learning loss. Now, if we really look at how the culture really works in Sri Lanka, not only we try to teach frogs to climb trees, but we also see that, and I'm not talking about children with learning difficulties, I'm talking about children as a whole. We also see that a lot of children with learning disabilities get left behind. And this is one of the biggest challenges. And we see that teachers often in Sri Lanka, they focus on children who can learn in the classroom rather than spending time and really trying to figure out how to include children who have learning disabilities. And the reason for this is because they haven't been taught or haven't been supported into really understand ways and methods in which to include children in the classroom and to kind of follow along or what needs to be done. So instead of really teaching them, they're kept off the streets and they're kept in school, but they don't really learn. And we see that is a huge issue. But we do have to give credit to the Vidyapita. I think we've heard from teachers that teachers who come from Vidyapita or the national training colleges, they do get education or do get some kind of exposure to child psychology and how to kind of deal with children with learning disabilities. However, about 45% of our teachers are graduate teachers, and there's a lacking in terms of support and kind of development in this area. And when we look at the situation, we see that most children that are poor or are coming from poor backgrounds are the ones that really faces. And looking at statistics before COVID, we see that 17% of our student population are poor or children in poverty. And then we look at, we have 42% under the age of 5 years old who are multi-dimensionally poor, right? From the recent report in 2019, which is done by the Census and Statistics Department and UNICEF collaboratively. And then when we look at COVID, what COVID has really done, that sets a huge significant loss. And with around 50 to 60% of poor children not having access to digital devices to really access school, we see that they are the ones who are most disadvantaged. And the Asian Development Bank recently said that poorest children face 57% more learning loss than those who are rich or those who come from privileged backgrounds. So through inflation and the government curtailing expenditure on education in the mix, we are seeing that we are going to see that a lot more children are going to be left behind. Absenteeism is on the rise. 0.5% is the average national dropout rate, but we are seeing in areas such as Vatiklo West, which is the zone that we went and looked at, the average rate is about dropouts is about 3 to 4%, which is 6 times more than the national average, and that's just going to increase, and that gap is going to come just become more wider. So we need to make sure that teachers, especially in these schools, are able to develop this capacity. The next point that I would like to draw your attention is to address the disparities which exist within free education system, the free education school system of Sri Lanka. by ensuring that government authorities overseeing school education administration establish a peer-to-peer support program where leading schools in the metropolises can be paired with to enable mutual learning development of the rural school and student exchanges between the two schools. This places great ownership of the education development process and the schools as the key institutions for education delivery. Now, on this point, it's a bit of an innovative method, and I think Atif, who would speak later, also would kind of elaborate on his views on this as well. We see that we have an issue in Sri Lanka where, because the environments in rural schools are not very conducive, a lot of the teachers ask for transfers and are transferred to central schools or national schools which are supported in and are in the urban areas. And while this, we could say that the teachers are in the wrong, the teachers have their reasons for moving and transferring, and there has not been a proper solution or control to this. So one thing that we could look at to kind of circumvent the issue is really seeing a way in which we could incentivize and get the schools that are privileged involved with supporting the outside school, because we want this idea where the nearest school is the best school kind of idea, which has been promoted by the Ministry of Education as well, to really come about. So this is a method that has worked in other countries and could really materialize in Sri Lanka as well. Another area that I want to talk about is addressing the education inequity. So looking at the first point here, which is to analyze an island-wide assessment of inequity in access to education, to recognize divisional secretariat divisions in each district, which requires greater access to trained teachers, improve school infrastructure, and timely access to digital learning spaces in provincial schools, and refocus a decentralized education strategy to address teacher development focused on local school is the best school concept, which reduces the dependency on national and central schools. Now, we've seen that in national and central schools, while there's a higher, sometimes there's an excess number of teachers in the schools, there's a larger population in the schools as well, student population, because you don't have access to certain streams like commerce and science and maths in these schools, especially in the rural areas. So what happens is most students, they have to travel for long distances to go to these central schools. This is not really easy in today's environment, because we have a fuel crisis and we have inflation. So this is in order to make education more accessible to these young, bright students, we could really look at changing the kind of status quo and providing more resources to the schools that really need it. And this is not, I'm not suggesting that we take the good teachers and transfer them into the schools that really need it. What we need to do is identify teachers who are willing to, and incentivize them and train them and give them the proper development to deal with the circumstances that are different and are in those schools. So I think these kind of ideas have been really thrown about in the past, but we really need to look at a proper strategy in terms of how we look at addressing the issue. The final point that I would like to come to is the need to reform the annual budgetary allocation for education and ensure that the relevant line ministries, departments, and local officers reserve funding for neglected dimensions of the education process, such as providing greater compensation for the teaching and academic staff, improving classroom environments in rural schools, and building capacity of educators on using education technology in classrooms. Now, a stat that I actually learned from the education forum, one of the additional additional secretaries of the Ministry of Education said this: only 65% of public investment goes to 95% of provincial schools, and 35% of public investment goes to 5% of the national schools. So a larger portion of money or public investment is going to this 5%. If you really look at the ratios, 35% for 5%. whereas we have only 65% for the 95% that really needs it. So how do we change this narrative? We really need to invest in the rural schools, and we need to change this, because at the end of the day, these schools, the children coming out of these schools, there is a sense of possibility that they would really do well and actually fight in terms of getting better employment and really support the economy in that way. Whereas if you keep funding the children who come from privileged backgrounds, will we see that return on investment, or do these children grow up to TikTok videos? So we need to be really careful. Not that I'm saying that we should not, or we should neglect, but that equity really needs to come into the picture. And we need to also ask those who, the children who come from privileged backgrounds, to really find ways in which they could give back. And that is something that I really believe would be a powerful narrative to change Sri Lanka. On that, I would like to hand it over to Atif, who would speak about education delivery.
Thank you very much for that, Jeremy. So I think it's fundamental that before we talk about any sort of system or any sort of fix, we understand, what the fundamental problems are. In my opinion, I see three main, Achilles heels that we have for any sort of educational system-based developments. And what I think is, funding and resources, which you went through, and there's a division of intention between teachers and students. Teachers and students don't want the same thing, right? They don't want to prosper. They don't have the same goal. And in addition to that, I often see and I often notice a problem, the lack of efficiency and an increased amount of bureaucracy that's not necessarily needed. Keeping that in mind, I also want to pick on something we talked about that was regarding the peer-to-peer based systems. And I finished my school or my high school last year, so not very far away. So I can tell you that peer-to-peer has been a great way of doing things. In skill development programs such as Model UN or debating, it was pivotal because it created a system and environment where all children wanted to work together, because they knew that there wasn't someone who's going to, critique them for who they are. They're working with peers who they will be seeing every day, and those who have no intent of harming them, right? It creates a sense of pride within children. They feel like this is part of their school, this is who they are, it's a community, and it allows them to focus on persevering. That's what I think about peer-to-peer and how I've seen it happen. With regards to my points, I want to focus on two fundamental things. The first is towards a 21st century based form of teaching and learning, right? Before we do that, we need to identify what's really wrong with what we have here, right? First thing that I find is a problem with how we teach and what we expect children to learn. And what I mean by that is the enforcement of rote activities, that is where learners engage in memorizing and recalling a broad array of content and are assessed preliminarily on their ability to recall and explain this information. I mean, we've all seen, everyone here in this room, everyone here who's on the other side of the screen, we all know fundamentally at the end of the day, we did A-levels. It was, a bunch of textbooks that we went through, we didn't use any of it. I mean, if you ask me now what I learned in 2017, I tell you I remember nothing. But I spent a lot of amount of time and in so much effort. And that's not what education is supposed to be, right? Another thing is a narrow focus on what we teach and how we teach it. Learners engage in experiences found preliminary on cognitive dimensions of learning. We don't explore the different ways of learning that children need to have in the ability to navigate the rest of life, right? And in addition to that, as Jeremy spoke very clearly about the unequal amounts of expectations and opportunities that are set out for the children, for them to perform. And how do I see to fix this? First thing, is to have inclusive classrooms. Sri Lanka, over the last 40 years, I would tell you, has been the furthest from inclusivity. We've stood away from people. We haven't looked people for who they are. We haven't had classrooms that are filled with boys and girls working together. We haven't had classrooms filled with people of all, creed, languages, and religion working together for the ultimate goal of learning something. We divide children at the grassroots. And how do we expect us to be a unified nation at the end of the day? That's one thing that I think is important to changing the mindset of children. The second thing is to push for rigorous learning. That is to push for critical thinking, a deep understanding in the means of creating or of analyzing knowledge as the prime focus, how children learn as opposed to memorizing content. And in addition to that, the whole child, having whole child focusing, where learners engage in experiences that nurture the totality of cognitive, emotional, social, and physical factors that impact their learning, development, character, and overall health and well-being. And finally, another way is active self-direction and self-learning. And what do we mean by that? We know that how the school systems work today is on a principle of spoon feeding children. And that's not something that works well. You jump into your undergraduate, you realize, oh my God, I'm lost. Lecturers expect you to do so much work. You expect to look at slides and understand how content works, but that's not how it works. And it's a massive step, especially if it's kids who are jumping into foreign universities. We will see children are expected to take so much responsibility among themselves. And that's something we need to change. And that's a way in which students are expected to learn in a different manner. And my second point is with regards to equitable learning. An IPS research from 2018 revealed in the 2016 HIES census that more than double the amount of poor children in the ages of 5 to 18 compared to their non-poor counterparts had dropped from school. That's something Jeremy talked about. And along with that, 67% of those children, O-level students, stopped attending due to poor educational progress, and 30% of those students due to financial problems. This essentially stems from the unequal distribution of resources between city and rural schools that we keep addressing day and day, every single point. I know it seems repetitive, but certainly that is the most important thing we need to deal with before we move ahead, right? That is our whole long-term plan that we need to work on. What we all proposed in our multiple proposals is the idea of hybrid and blended learning. And what do we mean by this? In 2020, 2021, and even parts of 2022, we've seen the importance of having different ways of learning. We've seen how traditional schooling backgrounds have not worked because, see, most students were unable to attend it. And we noticed this as a big problem because it happened in city schools as opposed to rural schools. If these sorts of practices and recurrences happen all the time in rural schools and we don't know about it, we don't hear about it, and quite frankly, some of us don't want to care about it. And that's something we need to fix, right? This would allow for better teacher management. As Jeremy talked about, teachers who don't want to work in rural schools. You have no excuse now. You're teaching kids over the internet, right? And in the long term, since the government, we hope to fix problems of infrastructure, that too would fix the problem. And another point that I will quickly conclude with is the whole idea of merit-based learning. And what I mean by this is how I see the ZSCO system being flawed. Now, A-levels across the world, that is the AQA system and whatnot, have a ZSCO-based system which would determine who comes first in terms of their advanced levels. That is to some extent true here. But however, we see that the cutoff marks, or rather the percentile where we draw, differs from region to region. We say that is the reason why we do this is to have some amount of equality. But no, that's not fair to the student who perform well. I mean, it's not my fault that I was born somewhere else or here. A student is to be tested for who they are and what they're capable of doing, not because of their inequalities. And I see it might seem a bit selfish, or rather, I would say, how would I call it? Prejudice for me to say it's important that we have a merit-based system because I come from Colombo, I come from a place of privilege. But we need to have an overall outlook that in 2040 or at some point in time where my children have the opportunity for them to be tested on their knowledge rather than where they come from. And that's why I think I draw the line at a final, conclusion and final end. With that, I would like to conclude from HYPE. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. And I would like to say that HYPE, has been very important for me. They let me come in, open their arms and allow me to come in at 17. I'm 19 now, and I'm glad they're able to do this for us. Thank you very much from Marga as well for letting us come here and speak today.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there are a lot of comments, questions that those of us who are listening have, but I would rather go in for question time at a later stage after everyone makes their presentation. Sure, there are a few points I would like to bring up later on in the discussion. So just another message to those of you who are connected on Zoom. Please post your questions. Please keep your mics on mute. And also, if you have a question, please post it on the chat box. At the discussion time, please raise your hand if you want to make a comment, you want to say something. Please remember the last bus from we want to finish the discussion by 5:30 or 6. So keep your questions short. I'm giving the opportunity to connect over. I mean, most of you have our email address, so you can always send an email later on if you have a question you want to discuss. So once again, I think I will hand you over to Dr. Sujata this time. And how would you prefer to sit here? So I'm going to move and over. Yeah, you sit here.
Thank you, Ahmad. Thank you, everybody. I think I'm not on mute. Right. Okay. It's really refreshing to hear these young voices to people like us who are now, can get jaded very easily, but we keep going still. But, hearing you, I thought these aspirations are in a way, they've been there always. I have in my phone, you download it free, copy of Emile by Rousseau, written in 1760. Aspirations were there. And, what's a good education? And then, John Dewey. And then my favorite is, was it Faure or there was a report, Faure report, UNESCO report. It gave 4 pillars of learning. Learning to do, learning to be together. So these are, what education should be about. So we actually, if you look at our policy documents, we continuously talk about these things. So how is it from the 18th century or before, we've been talking about this, and even today we're talking about sometimes the same thing. You talk about 21st century skills. But that's what, Rousseau was saying, this is the best way to raise a child, and they should learn by discovery and all that. John Dewey, all those, that's what they talked about. So, I mean, we are still talking about it. There's a class angle to it, which I'm not going to touch. Maybe actually Harini can do that. But to put it simply, I think education has always been captured by the middle class, by the elite. Whatever we try to do, it always gets captured. So there's that angle to it. But even the middle class children, are they getting a proper education? They are not. So, and also to the credit of government, say that, there's always been efforts to correct for that. For example, to change the schools, we've had ISRO schools, Navodaya schools, 1,000 schools, and then school is the best school. Those are real to overall improve everything, infrastructure, teacher training, everything. But let's talk about efforts to change the curriculum. I think that's probably what I like to focus on. In 1997, we had a major reform, I think, in actually Dr. Tara DeMel, who's my partner in crime, partner in the Education Forum. She actually wrote a book recently, Challenge to Change, 1995 to 2015. That was the time she was involved. And there was a major reform in primary education, 1997, that was launched. They tried it out in Gampa and came out with what's called competency-based, activity-centered curriculum for primary education. And actually to date, even I think it's gone through several iterations of curriculum updates. It's the same content, same idea. But it's amazing what's on paper and what's on practice is totally different. 1997, they have a percent of what percent of time should be spent on activities in class. For grade 1, it's about 90% of the time. So, and then when you come to grade 5, maybe it's 50%. But right now we know if you go to a class, the children are sitting down and writing. So why could not, even this is, why couldn't this simple thing, curriculum for the primary grades, why could not we get it implemented? I think that's where I think, education is so complex, our vision, there's so many aspects. We have to find, it's like moving a huge boulder. We have to find a lever point, leverage. And I think to me, the leverage point is exams. Because 1997 reforms, why didn't they work? I think, actually, it's not in Tara's book. She talks about all the political issues that there. But I think in 1995, this was launched in 1997, but in 1995, the Department of Exams changed the grade 5 scholarship exam. There was only one paper, that was a general intelligence paper, you know, literacy and numeracy. In 1995, there was a feeling that the teachers were not teaching the syllabus. So they added a second paper to make sure the teachers cover the syllabus. So although the curricula, you know, was all about activity-based children learning through discovery, no assessment, no examinations, absolutely no examinations in primary school, only assessments, continuous assessments, as we say. But all that was, you know, teachers could not do that because the grade 5 scholarship exam requires so much drilling and vast amounts of memorization. You know, I studied the paper 2 in depth, the environmental paper. You know, it's just, you have to learn how many palas, you know, how many, what are the seeds, what are, how each, the color of the beak of all animals, you know, what's the color? In one time they asked the color of the hunage bittare, right? So, I mean, which bittare are they going to ask next time? So that's an issue. So it's undefined, it's undefined content, right? So I spent 2 years in Ampara at the invitation of the Minister of Education at that time, 2012 to 2014. He said, ළමයි මොකද කියන්නේ ළමයි විභාගෙ දෙන්නුම් ජීවිතේ පරාදයි විභාගෙ සමත් ජීවිතය අසමත්, right? So we had to start with primary, and we took the existing curriculum because it's good. And we, you know, we got all the activity based, we had a Sellan Sandeva and all that once a month. But we found the teacher were having a double duty because they were doing activity based teaching and learning, and they were preparing children for the exam. So it was not sustainable. So I think one key thing is to change the exam system, and none of the reforms ever actually touched that. Only there's a document dated December 2020. It's on our site. We actually, you know, got it. Nobody publicized that. I always, when I get something, I publish and I say in the name of in public interest. Right? People tell me don't share, and I still publish anyway. If it's and I say in the public interest, it's on our website. Actually, it really looks at major changes to reducing the number of subjects in the GCO level down right from 50 to now to down to 8, and teaching, you know, teaching and assessing the rest at school-based level. It's actually quite a big jump from where we are, but that's the first time though that these kind of the changes to the assessment to the national exams is initial. So I think we can't do any reforms. None of these can be achieved unless we change the exams, because really parents, you know, we know that the exams matter. So that would be the key thing. And I think I just checked with the Minister of Education. They are actually, that proposal is going to be refined, but I think they felt it was a little too radical. There's a new national policy and the reform package. I said, we've had this, you know, so many times you've heard this. We need to get it out because this is the time. This is the time because, you know, we are in a deep, deep economic crisis. You know, we've joined the ranks of Lebanon. We don't realize it yet, but it'll come. It's going to take a long time, maybe 10 years, I think, to get out of this. If you look at the cases of Argentina, Venezuela, Greece, and Lebanon, you know, that's this company we are in. But the time to invest in education is when there's blood in the streets. No, you know, is when there's economic depression. Because I work in the US, we work for a company that did statistics for National Science Foundation, and we collected data on graduate enrollments in US universities, you know, and we found that you could tell when there's going to be economic depression, economic downturn, because the graduate student enrollments go up. People invest in education. When there's economic downturn, people invest in education. And we looked at, right now I have a research, somebody working with me on research. We are looking to see how Greece, all these countries, what they have done with education. And we found that in OECD, when there's economic crisis, they invest in education. So we do need to invest in education, increase actually investments in education, or at least maintain that. But then I think that we have an issue with how we distribute the resources within the education budget. In 2003, World Bank published a really very well researched document called Treasures of the Education System. It's again, I have put a link in our Education Forum archive for that. And looking at funding, they said actually in comparating among peers, we spend as a percent, we spend more on higher education in the education budget per capita spending. So I have tried to do the same calculation for today, but it's very complex, but I've been tracking in the total education budget. Education budget is very difficult to understand because Ministry of Education in 2021, it was 176 billion or something the budget, but the provincial budget is in the Ministry of Provincial Councils and Local Government. So it's about the same. So our actually education budget, I got these numbers from the Minister of Education, Dr. Wehel. It was actually 346 billion, our education budget. So I would like to just leave some thought, especially because Dr. Harani is here. I thought just something provocative. I think what do we need to do? I think we need to first focus on really reforming the curriculum starting with assessments. Because all this time we've done beautiful curricula, trained teachers, but for the same exam system. So to do that, it's going to be a massive effort. Because I tried that last year with St. Thomas's College. We using the existing curriculum, we did really 100% activity-based lesson plans for non-core subjects, like say take science, and not math and language, for the rest of it, geography, even science, grade 6 to 9, you can teach the whole thing through projects, right? So, but to do that, it's a massive effort. We need to double the school education budget. Right? We need to double the school education. Where's the money going to come? And I think tertiary education, higher education, public education, we need to start charging fees. We should give merit-based scholarships to deserving students, but I think right now the government is involved in mass higher education. No, government should not be involved in mass higher education. We should fund 3 really good research universities or research departments, right? Our undergraduate, we should get the cream of the cream undergraduates into the public schools. They should not be going to private universities, where only the public schools can give the research space for them. So they should be, doing project-based, research-based education right from the beginning. You can't do that by increasing enrollments. The familiar refrain, 200,000 qualify for the past A level, just 3 subjects, any 3 subjects, and only so many such percent go to the university, and we need to increase that. That's been a very loud voice. Even our Joseph Stalin and Ceylon Teachers Union, they go on, increase. They go on, supporting no SITEM, abolish SITEM, no private. But what happens is when there's no private spending in higher education, the government puts money into higher education, who gets knocked out? School education. School education budget gets knocked out. So that's why we should double the school education budget and start charging fees for higher education across the board. And I think, and continue to give scholarships, like right now, what we are giving our students is, 100% scholarships to everybody. I think we should rank it and give it to the most deserving. But any money saved, I think, of course, what's charged should go to higher education, but any money saved from the treasury should go to school education, school education, school education. Give our children fighting chance, all our children. This is 4.1 million, million children in the school system. And every year, 350 to 60,000. Actually, there was a bulge in the birth rates in 2004 or something. So now we have more youth coming in. Early, it was about 320. Now we have about 360,000 youth turning 18 every year. All those, right now, we take that cohort. I think a UGC calculates for the cohort for, I think, 17 to 24 or something. I forget a certain range. And 7% we give full 100% free education. The rest of them, we don't care. We don't. So I think it's time to pay attention to the age 0 to 18 and make sure we get our youth when they come out ready to face the world. And if some of them can get full scholarships and go to public, private universities, some of them will take loans and go to higher education, but the focus should be school education. And we should go for fee-based higher education. Canada, they don't have any private universities, but students pay fees. At least 1/3 of the university budget comes from fees. And I think we need to go to that situation and take our, just because the loudest voices comes from the tertiary education, the school sector, we don't hear from them. So their budgets have been getting thinner and thinner. We need to really put back our money into school education. And any reform should start with reform in the exams. Anything that doesn't reform the exams, all this nice curricula won't work. So those are two things I would say we need to do. Okay.
Thank you,
15
Dr.
minutes.
I think for me coming here, we sit here. Right.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for organizing this seminar on a subject that is definitely very high on my list of priorities. Okay, so my presentation, or what I'm going to share with you, is going to be slightly different. I think there were very specific recommendations that came both from HYPE and from Dr. Sujatha, talking about very specific kinds of interventions that you recommend for education. I'm going to take a step back, right? And I want to look at this crisis in education in a slightly more reflective manner, because I think both Dr. Sujatha and the three of you raised the issue, especially Dr. Sujatha has raised the issue about, we've been talking about these things for a long time. None of what you have proposed or what you are talking about is particularly new. These are issues that we've talked about. Problems in the sector have been in this sector for years. And I think we need to look at why we are not making progress and why instead we are sort of actually regressing. So for me, this is also a question about what we mean by education and why we need education and what the responsibility of the state is towards providing education. So I'm obviously taking a position from our perspective, from the perspective I'm referring to the education policy that we are as a political movement that we subscribe to, that we developed, and that we are advocating for, right? So I will be taking that position. So for us, education, the value of education lies in its transformative potential, right? We think education provides a space for critical thinking. It facilitates the circulation and production of knowledge. Very importantly, it is the space through which you can produce active citizens who are necessary for taking leadership positions in society. And for us, very importantly, it's also a mechanism for addressing social inequalities, right? I think that's especially important in our particular context, where we are a very hierarchical society, where our identities and our positions in society are based very much on our ability to navigate our situation in society is based very much on factors like your class, your gender, the language you speak, the school you went to, all of these factors, right? So in that sense, an equitable education system, we think, is a key mechanism for ensuring social equality, which we think is important in terms of social stability for a country as well. So from that point of view, for us, education is a public good. It's a social entitlement, right? And we think that the government has a role to protect that public good and to protect that as a social entitlement, which is accessible to all. So in that sense, we do not think of education as simply a site of kind of service provision, and where there's a relation, that there's a product and there's a consumer. Students, whether in schools or in tertiary education today, are frequently referred to as customers and clients. We don't think it's that kind of relationship that exists or should exist in sites of education. This is not a consumer activity. Education is not a commodity, right? It is a public good, and we think that the sites of education also need to be organized in ways in which there is a recognition that education is over and above a public good and a social entitlement, and the role of the state is in protecting that as a public good and as a social entitlement. So for us, the key problems that we are trying to address in our policy are what we see as the huge disparities in education. Currently, our education system, the kind of education you access is determined by your socioeconomic position. If you are able to afford it, you are able to access a higher quality education. If you can't afford it, well, tough luck. You take what you get, right? There are huge inequalities when it comes to infrastructure. I think some of you mentioned that, even in terms of how our budget is organized and how money is allocated. I mean, these go down to very sort of basic things like whether there are schools that don't have access to water, schools that don't have proper sanitary facilities, which has a huge impact, especially on the ways in which girls are able to access education, even female teachers who face serious problems because of basic facilities not being provided. It also, there are lots of schools still which cannot afford to provide proper teachers for subjects like English, maths, or science. Schools that cannot provide access to A-level subjects in certain streams. So there are huge disparities, and these disparities are not just rural and urban. They exist everywhere. You just have to step out of, St. Thomas's College or Ladies College or Bishop's College and look over the fence, and you'll see a school that has absolutely none of the kinds of facilities that the other big schools enjoy, right? So this is a real problem. There's a serious problem of disparities in the quality of our education that is experienced by students. So there's also a problem of governance in education. There's been the education sector, like other sectors, have been heavily politicized. Appointments are politically interfered with. Curriculums keep getting changed every few years or so. There's no consistency, there's no cohesion in how education policy has been implemented over the years, and this is due to various governments coming and changing things willy-nilly without there being a proper, consistent or coherent policy that is allowed to function for a while. So governance, education governance is a huge issue. There's a hugely unregulated private education sector, which flourishes, which has emerged as a result of the deterioration in the state education system, and that private education sector is unregulated. So there's again real concerns with the kinds of education that is accessible, even if you pay for it. And the other worrying factor is the emerging role of the military in education, right? Part of the budget for the defense ministry is also spent on education. They have a school, now they have a university, which is accessible to civilian students as well. And that's taking up a lot of money, which could have gone into the state education system, which is being now eaten up by the military budget as well, which is so, and also, I mean, there's a fundamental problem whether the military should be involved in the in education. So these are some of the key problems that we see in our education sector. So what do we propose, right? Certainly education reform will be a key priority in a government that we are part of. And the key goal in our education policy is improving access to quality education, not just improving access, but improving access to quality education, whether it's at the school level or whether it's at the tertiary level. We do not think education should be the preserve of a privileged minority. It's a right of every citizen in this country, and ensuring that right is the responsibility of the state. Professionalizing the sector is one of the key concerns that we have. And this includes teacher training, supervision of teachers, teacher salaries, teacher entitlements, whether at the school level or at university level, the salaries and entitlements and the support system that's currently provided, especially to school teachers, is abysmal. There can be in no way can a country expect high quality education if you do not teach if you do not consider or you don't treat the profession of education in a way that gives them self-respect and dignity in what they do. So that's a huge concern. Education administration is a huge problem, whether it's training of teachers, whether it's principals, whether it's the higher education sector management, across the board, education administration has become a serious issue. So dealing with the structures of education administration, ensuring that there are proper systems in place that manage and regulate the system are critical. Depoliticizing the entire system so that there cannot be interference from the political authority in terms of appointments, in terms of ad hoc policy reforms and policy changes. And of course, yes, I mean, we agree the content, the teaching, the content, curriculum, all of those things that you were talking about. Yes, but there needs to be a system in place that can actually implement all these reforms. There need to be teachers who can actually do that, who are motivated and supported to implement these reforms. So we can have the fanciest curricula, but you need a system and you need people who can actually deliver on those. And we think if we set the systems in place, that will happen. That will come as a consequence of having proper systems in place. For us, ensuring quality is not about making it more bureaucratic. Currently, whether it's in the school system or in the university system, the emphasis is on the emphasis when it comes to talking about quality is on ensuring that there's a paper trail. I was also in the higher education sector. I was a university lecturer, and half my time was spent in filling mindless numbers of mindless forms that God knows did what actually took my time away from doing my proper job. But where quality has now been reduced to some kind of bureaucratic procedure of filling forms, right? So instead, we think quality should be less instrumentalized, more about less quantified, and more about transforming the relationship relationships in the teaching learning environment. For us, the site of education is primarily a site where there are relationships between teachers and students, between administrators and students. And the quality of those relationships is what will be profoundly important in making the kinds of changes that we want in education, and ensuring that that those spaces and those sites are able to have the kinds of relationships that will ensure a healthy teaching learning environment, right? And that the site of education is also a place where there's transformative relationships, that it's not some sort of cookie cutter system that you're talking about. And I think in terms of what you said, Dr. Sujata, the kind of exam system that we promote is exactly that is the problem, where it kind of, expects everybody to conform to a particular ideal of what an educated person should look like or be like. Rather, it has to be much more democratic and much more diverse. The private sector has to be strictly regulated. While we see that there is the primary responsibility of providing and ensuring education lies with the state, we know that overnight the private sector is not going to disappear, and that the private sector needs to be regulated. It cannot function in this ad hoc way that it is currently functioning. For us, universities need to be centers of critical knowledge and sites of knowledge production and circulation, so that universities cannot be dumbed down to become just simply vocational training institutes. You need vocational training. You need institutes that provide professional training. So expanding tertiary education doesn't necessarily mean only expanding university education. It's about expanding all forms of higher education, where there are many options available and not just sort of one path for students, and a sort of a dilution of what even a university should mean. So in that sense, if I respond to Dr. Sujata's issue about there is a problem about the budget, and we don't think the answer lies in just taking away from one thing and putting it into another. Education has to be a priority in this country. We are a small country. Human resources are our biggest strength. Investing in human resources has to be a priority for our country. And we need to look at the history of education in our country, the context within which a free education system was established in our country. And it's not just a matter of, I completely agree that the emphasis has to be on general education, certainly, but that doesn't mean that you stop funding higher education. Higher education is as necessary for this country, is an important and critical site in ensuring social equality, because it's actually one of the few places in this country where everyone can come together in one space. And that's essential in terms of the kind of society we want to live in. So it's not an either or thing that you choose higher education or general education. Education has to be a priority in this country if we are to get out of the crisis that we are facing. And if you look at the reasons for the crisis that we are in today, you will find that a lot of it is linked to the deterioration in our education system and our inability to produce the kinds of people and the leaders we want in charge. And that's largely linked to our education. The kinds of citizens that we want to take our country out of this mess has to come out of that, of a robust, democratic, and equitable education system. And that has to be a priority if we are to progress in any way. So I'll end with those remarks. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, but thank you very much once again for the opportunity, and I look forward to a good conversation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harini. I'm sure we're going to have a discussion on privatization and about budgets. I think a lot of food for thought. My task is somewhat difficult today because I was supposed to just moderate, and I was, all geared to talk about what Hype was suggesting about, bringing education in to make a civic conscious person, allowing or, getting teachers to be more kind of open-minded, upgrading their skills and psychology when they're talking about, when they're teaching students, and a lot of suggestions, a lot of ideas about exams. But I think we are pressed for time. So I'm trying to, what I will do is, I was suddenly had this task of coming up with a presentation within 24 hours because Sterling Pereira was, got very sick. So I hope I will do justice to his study and touch on, I'm sure I'm going to touch on some of the aspects that our previous presenters spoke about. So share this now. How do I do this? Yeah, first. Okay. Can see. Okay, fine. Let's get on with it. I start by asking education for what? Okay, we can go on discussing that later. I'm going to ask a question from all of you here. Okay, here is a little girl that I met a few days ago. I was in Kalutura district, beyond Matugama area, in a village called Balagala. And this is Umesha Asambika, right, in year 7. Let's take 2 minutes. I want to ask people present here, what do you think her favorite subject is? Shiranti, can you say? Maths, okay. Dance, okay. Anyone else from Hype? What? Okay. Myrtle? Art. Okay. There are no prizes for the correct answer, but we'll give a clap once I divulge what the correct answer is. Okay. So getting on to our subject, our focus at Marga, our research program supported by Gamini Korea Foundation, was on to look at linkages between education and very high human development status. Now, what are the attributes? What are the prerequisites that we could have to take from education? And our study approach was to first look at the good side of education. I'm surely, our education system for last several decades, after 75 years of, almost 75 years of independence, there must be something good, right? You all believe there should be something that is good about education. Let's look at that. What are the plus points? Then identify gaps, right? We, in our study, looked at 3 countries, Finland, South Korea, and Singapore, to set realistic targets. South Korea and Singapore is because, they are leaders in the field of education. They are both Asian countries. They are, achieving excellence in education. And Finland as a, very developed country to set a future goal if possible. And arising out of that study, we made some recommendations, which we have not quite yet made public, if I'm not mistaken. So here is Okay, that happens. So look at school enrollment from grade 1 to grade 13, right? One noteworthy fact is when you look at the primary cycles, the the primary age and junior and even up to A-level and O-level. The school enrollment and the participation between male and female, it's almost equal. You know, here between grade 1 and 5, it's almost 50% female, 50% male. As you go on, grade 10 to 11, 50%, 0.5 female, 49.5% male. So that school enrollment at school level is also a noteworthy kind of prerequisite for very high human development. Let's go on to sorry, what am I doing? Also, according to the statistics we have up to 2018, right, there is a reduction in school dropouts, right? According to UNESCO report, the school dropouts or children not attending school has rapidly decreased, as you can see from the screen. Also, high proportion of pupils in the senior secondary low scale, that's grade 10 and 11, they actually succeed in enrolling to advanced level. So there are increasing numbers qualifying for university admission. So I'm not going to say, I mean, this is hunky-dory or whatever, but these are good signs. Right? The numbers are increasing. When it comes to the increase in national vocational qualifications, NVQ qualifications, we see from 2010 to 2018, there's steady increase, whether it's Department of Tertiary Education and Training, whether it is national, this NITA or NYSC, the private, you see from 13,000 to, it has gone to 61,000. I think these are good signs where students are moving into vocational training and getting skills in various other fields where they're employed. And here I'll quickly go through this. When you look at enrollment from O-level to A-level, the percentages are increasing very marginally. I mean, it's not much. Numbers of students qualifying for university admission also increasing from 64% to 66%, right? And the numbers that are qualifying and admitted to universities also marginally increasing. So on one hand, I feel that, I mean, of course, we can always compare with the population of that year also, but overall, generally, it is not a bad picture. Another aspect that our study brought out is the comparison between students who enter into art stream and other streams. There is this myth that, you know, great percentage, 60% of the students are in 40% or whatever, which is not correct because double the amount of students are there in other streams, like when you take the other streams into consideration. So that also, when you look at in the light of how or what it means when it comes to very high human development status, you see that these other streams have more opportunity for employment. And therefore, this also we take it in a positive light. Right? Here is a slide about expected years of schooling. In Sri Lanka, if you take the mean years of education, it compares well with countries like Singapore and Korea. These countries are rapidly moving towards very high human development. They are already there. And they got there within a space of 20 to 25 years. Still, even though the number of schooling years is comparatively high, look at our Human Development Indicator rank compared to South Korea and Singapore around below 25, they are 72. So that means we have to focus on other aspects of education that drive human development. Tertiary education, for instance, the participation in that, the number of research personnel per million people that are in Sri Lanka, and the government education investment, as Dr. Harnik spoke about, the percentage that actually go into the education, the national education system. These are the gross enrollment ratios. We are looking at selected countries. In Sri Lanka, the ratio or percentage of who actually qualifies for university education and who actually gets there. If you look at South Korea, it's 100%. Singapore, they didn't have these figures, but we look at 2018, 2017, 2016, it's on the mid 80s and high 80s, where Sri Lanka is still below 20%. So the investment has been 2.5% of GDP up to 2010, and which in a way resulted in around about only about 17% candidates who sat for the GC advanced level examination, qualifying and getting into state university education. But when you look at other lower and middle income countries, comparatively, it's about 23%. And middle income countries, 43%. And we are supposed to be technically a middle income country. I think a few minutes back, particularly from Skype, we were talking about, schools, how much of money goes into different sets of schools. Correct me if I'm wrong. Jeremy spoke about 65% of the budget going to about 25%. Yeah. So maybe this is the problem. If you look at the school by size, number of people, there are 1,400 schools where students are less than 50. Like if you look at total of, say, I think, I'm not very good at math, but I think this is all about close to 10,000. Over 7,000 schools have less than 500 students. So the small schools are widespread. Sometimes they're in Colombo, they're in Kandy, in all these places. And providing sufficient teachers for these small schools is a problem. It's about resources. So small schools usually with inadequate numbers of qualified teachers and hardly any extracurricular activities cannot expect to provide the required prerequisites or attributes for us to achieve very high human development. So here, even up to say, 500 students, it's close upon 7,000. Right? So you talk about budget allocations, all that. I guess we need to keep this particular table in mind. That's something that I want to touch on. Once again, out of the 10,000 schools, only about 10% teach science, right? Favorite subject we spoke about, let's get on to that later, right? So out of about 3.8 million students, only about 1.5 million have access to science education. Some time ago, in 2002, I think there was a experiment that was made. I like to spend some time because we didn't speak about English education. So pupils were given the option of, right, where they could study subjects and examined, or the exams were also conducted in English, while remaining in their main class with, doing some other subjects. Probably Sinhalese, you can teach Sinhalese in English. So Sinhalese and religion you can't touch. It's like the Holy Grail, right? So that's been also taught in Sinhala, and history, stuff like that. Other subjects were taught in English, and my youngest son was one of the students who managed to benefit from this whole scheme. So World Bank supported this venture, caught on very well. And interesting, in many provinces like Ampara, Putala, Eastern Province, Uva Province, it got on very well. And some of the mathematics and science teachers, they were able to teach in English. Right? So the performance of the students who studied English was much better than those who sat for the examination in Sinhala and Tamil. Something that we can take from. So we believe that this program needs to be strengthened more. And from the whole idea that we have, where Margaret, when we look at research, it's like a thematic kind of, not thematic, it's like a cross-cutting theme. How can we achieve very high human development status? So up to tertiary education, if students can learn in English, they will lead better, they will have better employability, they will have better prospects where employment is concerned, and also be able to pursue further studies in English. So a little bit about Umesha. Okay. Umesha's favorite subject is actually science. Good for you. Right? And she got 94 out of 100 the last test. She got 98 for maths. It was very interesting because I walked into this house and I said, have you seen me on TV? Right? And she looked at me and sat down and asked, what will you ask the president if he comes to your house? Spoke about her life. Her mother has gone to Middle East or to Saudi Arabia 5 months ago. Father is a person who's stripping cinnamon. And that means it's a seasonal job. So half the time he's at home, probably would like to power. And grandmother is looking up. But this child has a clear kind of, objective or goal. She wants to study in science. She wants to, be a doctor. So I thought today's our presentation or even our discussion should be about children like Umesha. How can we provide Umesha a better education? How can we make her a world-class doctor? How can she go to Canada or Australia or United States, go for conferences, share global knowledge, all that? I believe, as Dr. Harini quite correctly presented to us, education is not like a, like a commodity. It's something that whole of society should give this child. And education system should be linked. Right? I was at several discussions during the last 1 month, with talks about social cohesion, about hate speech, about, language rights. Everybody talks about education as, the cookie cutter solution and saying, "Look, we must look at education." Yeah, let's take that on in our discussion. My question is, who taught you to stand up in the bus when a member of the clergy came? Did your teacher teach you that, or did your mother teach you that? Who taught you to say, speak to a, elder with respect? I mean, you acquire that. And I think school system education should be linked to, various other social institutions in our country. Enough of that. So, some observations very quickly on the last couple of slides. We all know there's a need for teachers in science and mathematics at school level. My friend Jeremy didn't speak about this. He also is part of a very interesting endeavor. It's called Teach for Sudan. It's part of Teach for International, where they are, getting graduates, various graduates and placing them in the underprivileged schools. And it's like a mentoring program. Right? That's something that we should discuss at a later date. Right? So there's a need to promote tertiary and vocational education and training. Yes. And also technology for nursing and colleges. Despite the increasing demand, right, the private sector higher education, there needs to be, it is restricted because of the view that, allowing more people who deny low-income students the opportunity of higher education. It's not restricting, it's regulating that we need. So the government is now providing loan schemes. Quality of learning provided in university also is also essential prerequisite for very high human development. National university programs we see have not changed over the last so many years. It's improvement. It needs to be modernized and meet modern requirements for global economy. We spoke about school curriculum and development. We need to have school-based assessment. Dr. Sujatha spoke about exams. Unless we change the exam system, we won't change education. Whatever we do, we can bring in teachers, we can have different type of ways of learning. But if we have the same exam at the end of the day, it's not going to help us at all. Building of competencies is important. Communication, literacy, graphics, social sciences, whatever. And to promote and inculcate attitudes and skills where people are, we inculcate this tendency or whatever, ability to work as a team, ability to work as part of the group. Finally, we need to concentrate on the modalities of teacher learning, promoting creativity, critical thinking, communication, all that is very necessary. And this is one point our study brings out, and I like to try to pinpoint that, where we say we have to identify each subject by its components of a key concept and a big idea. Whatever subject it is, what are the key concepts this subject is teaching or subject wants the students to learn? What is the big idea behind it, right? And teaching should be done accordingly. Not only teaching, when it comes to assessing the students should be assessed based on that. They are practical kind of how these concepts can be applied, the application. So that we believe should come in even to the O levels and A levels. project work and on-site field studies a must. I think Dr. Sujatha spoke about the time that students spend on in the classroom, where more time should be spent on project activities. Wider choice of subject at university level. We spoke about that at length when we were doing the study, where even say you take a doctor, there should be an additional subject where they study about some other something to do with social science, or even to get an overall a wider perspective of things, right? So widening the choice of subjects at university level, where insist on only 2 subjects related to the university of course, while there is a free choice regarding the third subject. So that's it. So that is basically what we took out from the study we did on secondary education and related to today's subject of what sort of reforms should we look at. So I think I will stop at that. And first of all, we'll entertain any questions or anything from the floor here. Look at whether there are any questions posted on the chat box. I didn't see any. No, there's nothing in the chat. Okay.
I'm glad these young people are actually Singapore in 1988. Singapore was going through very early specialization, very early. To discover the price, I had to teach one whole semester to just one student because she was a very, very bright student who was selected for something called direct honors in economics. So I told him at that time, such a bright student is exposed just to economics only. What a waste. Fortunately, that program was scrapped. Now Singapore is going the other way around, broad-based education. They have started this School of Humanities and Sciences, putting them together. Because we all know you can learn mathematics, but when it comes to making decisions, you should be able to work in the gray area. So political science with humanities teach you that. Sciences don't. So that's why we bring them together. So in Sri Lanka, I think we should consider this pyramid type education structure, very broad based, and we specialize at a later stage, not very early stage. In that sense, I don't like A-level subjects just confined just to 3 subjects. It should be more. Let students learn more and then specialize in it. Second point is based on the study I did on Sri Lanka. It's a subnational study. It covers many areas. Education is one of them. I looked at a number of education criteria to rank districts. Although there is some convergence of districts, surprisingly, the ranking remains same year after year. I compared 2012, 2016, 2019. Top rank districts, you all know, Colombo, Lamba, Goa, and Canton. And low rank districts, other districts in northern province, so these district disparities need to be addressed in education reforms. So those are the points.
We've been worrying about the system and what should be done. And I think I added to that. At least I tried to reduce it to 2 things. But the issue is we probably got the different there we have proposed a small box. But who's going to hang the bed? Who's going to bear the tax? And that is the major issue. You know, I said we've known these things from way back. You said from before. The things have changed in their terminology. But we have an idea of what it should be, we know it's accessible, it should be equitable, but why is it not getting done? So I think, probably, I think, you know, maybe with that. One thing I suggest is, you know, we have a ministries, we have one ministry of education. We long ask people that now sometimes you have fear, but you know, that you have to worry about when you get what you ask. We have one ministry of education and several state ministers. Nothing is moving, and we have proposed now actually the parliament which have sectoral oversight committees. Right now, there's the sectoral oversight committees. The good thing is about the ministries. Once the cabinet is there, the ministries are there. They make decisions, and there's really no way of trying to question what's being done or what's not being. So I think if we want all these nice things to be done, and we need to focus on what happens in the parliaments and what we can. So we have there when the authorities don't do what that's good. So right now, I think for oversight committees, parliament have to be activated and they have to be chaired by backbenchers or opposition. So I think that's one mechanism. Otherwise, actually, we can talk about all these good things until the cost down home, but you know. This will implement this. I think that also to have a say when they're not being implemented. So I think we can always come to these kind of meetings and talk about what's wrong and what needs to be done. Who's been doing it? And how can we make them do it?
Can we make Dr. Harini respond to that? At least here.
Yeah, I think you can't take the education out of the rest of the conducting system and ask why is the education sector not functioning. The fact that the education sector is not functioning is indicative of the collapse of the entire system, right? And the main problem we see in this country is the one of political culture, right? The corruption, the patronage, the nepotism, wastage, excessive privileges, you can go on and on. So all of this has impacted on every sector. Education in particular, because unfortunately, education was not as over a sector that anyone could make money out of. So there was never much interest in doing anything in education. When institutional government committed to education reform. But maybe start off the so that's why in my presentation, I said governments issue. These are huge concern. So even in Parliament, even having oversight sectoral committees, which was a good thing, but are still not being activated. This has been talked about for over a year now, and still have not been activated. Is an indication of the unwillingness of the current political authority to be held accountable, right? And in a parliament where the opposition is in a very weak position, I don't think the oversight committees are going to be in a larger context where political authority is so corrupt. And I don't mean corrupt simply in terms of potential corruption, but corruption in the very nature of their political function. So unless we address that, I don't think we can expect the education system to flourish when everything else is collapsing right now. So we need that change in the political system if we are to really really make any headway in any of those things, but we need to see those directions. To see those directions.